Welcome to Global Women's Studies Colloquium. I am Dr. Heather Belknap. I'm the coordinator for Global Women's Studies. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. For those of you who are enrolled in the class, welcome. And any others who are here, we're so glad that you are spending this hour with us. It is my pleasure to be welcoming Dr. Dolores Delgado Bernal, who is the professor of Chicana and Latina Studies at Loyola Marymount University. And she will be speaking to us today about, well, here's the title, and here's my very rudimentary Spanish. Vamos a platicar, conceptualizing Pláticas as a feminista research methodology. So, as is our custom, we will begin with an opening prayer, which is going to be offered by Phoebe Clark, who is a sociology major and a global women's studies minor. Phoebe.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful that we have the opportunity to be here today together to learn from Dr. Delgado Bernal. We ask Thee that we might have Thy Spirit to be with us, that we might have our hearts and our minds open, that we can take what we learned today and apply it to the different fields of study that we're going into. We're grateful for Thy gospel and Thy love, and please help us to look for ways to serve and uplift those around us. And we love Thee very much and say these things in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
So here is the order of events. We will have an introduction from a Global Women's Studies minor, Christina Young, and then we will be privileged to hear from Dr. Delgado Bernal. After she has finished her presentation, the response will be given by Jasmine Martinez, and then the Q&A will be led by Sadie Bingham. We will go all the way up until the end of the hour, but we know that some of you will need to leave for class, so if you would just feel free to do that as you need to quietly and respectfully. But with that, let's begin.
Dr. Dolores Delgado Bernal is a first-generation college student originally from Kansas City, Missouri. She did her undergraduate at Kansas State University, her master's at the University of Missouri, and then moved to California to work for the National Latino Civil Rights Organization. She's currently a professor of educational leadership and administration and co-director of the Doctor of Education program in educational leadership for social justice at Loyola Marymount University. Previously at California State University, Los Angeles, she served as chair for the Department of Chicano and Latino Studies and then associate dean for the College of Ethnic Studies. She's an American Educational Research Association fellow and a scholar activist whose scholarship bridges the fields of education and ethnic studies and whose passion is in female mentorship of students. Her research draws ideas from Chicana feminism, critical race theory, and decolonial methods to explore issues like educational inequality, Latinx student pathways, feminist teaching approaches, and various types of student resistance. She has published over 40 articles with numerous awards, including the American Educational Research Association Distinguished Scholar Award, the Tortuga Active Women in Letters and Social Change Award, and Critical Race Studies and Education Association Derek Bell Legacy Award. Her biggest award of all being Mom to 3 Kind and Generous Boys. So today she'll be presenting to us about conceptualizing talks as a feminist research methodology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Delgado Bernal.
Okay, let me see.
I think that's on. Yeah? Okay, wonderful. Let me get my computer up here. Okay, thank you for being here. I really want to start by thanking First, Christina and Larissa, who reached out to me this week to kind of give me the agenda and protocol for today. Appreciate that. Especially to Dr. Belknap for the invitation, Global Women's Studies. Thank you for that. And for all of you for spending a little bit of time with me today. A special shout out because I'm so happy to be back in Utah. I lived in Utah for 15 years, 15 wonderful years, raised my boys here. And a special shout out to two of your amazing, brilliant, compassionate faculty who are here, Dr. Juan Freire in the School of Education, as well as Dr. Ramona Barreto Kutri, who is in your School of Ed. So our lives have intersected in multiple ways, and it's nice to be here with them also. Before I start, I'd like to do two things. The first is I want to give gratitude to Ute, Paiute, Shoshone people who are the traditional caretakers of the unceded land that I'm standing on, that you're on. I also acknowledge that much of the economic progress of the U.S. And development is a result of stolen land, enslaved African labor, and underpaid and exploited immigrant labor. I honor that labor and the resistance of ancestors. The second thing I'd like to do before I actually start is I would be negligent if I ignored the fact that the election results this week have been traumatizing for many, including my birth family, my queer family, current and former students. I say this knowing where I'm at in a solid red state, where I have wonderful positive memories of being here. But many in my circle are fearful of the president-elect's first day in office when he plans to initiate mass deportations. I want to read some words by Black spiritual, cultural leader Vanessa Williams that really helped me get moving on Wednesday morning. You're awakening to the same country you fell asleep to, the very same country. Pull yourself together. And when you see me, do not ask me, what do we do now? How do we get through the next 4 years? Some of my ancestors dealt with at least 400 years of this under worse conditions. Continue to do the good work. Continue to build bridges, not walls. Continue to lead with compassion. Continue the demanding work of liberation for all. Continue to dismantle broken systems, large and small. Continue to set the best example for the children. Continue to be the vessel of nourishing joy. Do so in the name of the Creator, who expects nothing less from each of us. That helped me get moving Wednesday. I'll keep us moving right now. What I'm going to talk about, the title you heard, but the loteria card I have is El Viaje, the journey. And so the journey is significant to where I'm going to go today with my comments. There's two things that I hope you take away from my comments today. The first is an understanding of the trajectory, or the viaje, to Feminista Pláticas as a methodological disruption. Pláticas as a methodological disruption. And then the second thing I hope you take away is an understanding of what a Feminista Pláticas methodology looks like. So those two things. And let me give you a little map of where I'm going to go for the next 30 minutes. I'll first share my epistemological grounding, and what I mean by that, epistemology being systems of knowing, how we know what we know. I'm going to give you that grounding. I then want to talk about some early paradigm shifts, particularly feminista paradigm shifts, and then get to this idea of Pláticas as methodology and what that looks like. There's two terms that I want to make sure and conceptualize for you as I get started. The first is feminista, and I use that interchangeably with Chicana Latina feminists. So feminista scholars, feminista theories, I use feminista instead of the whole thing. And then the second is, if you are not a Spanish speaker, Pláticas, the literal translation is informal conversations. I hope you see by the end of my comments that it's much more, both in practice and as a methodology. Let me contextualize this collective journey, this viaje, to Feminista Pláticas with a quote from Chicana philosopher, writer, feminist Gloria Anzaldúa. And she says, necesitamos teorías that will rewrite history using race, class, gender, and ethnicities as categories of analysis. Theories that cross borders, that blur boundaries, new kinds of theories with new theorizing methods. Anzaldúa's call has given me and so many other scholars inspiration to disrupt dominant research paradigms and really to create new methodologies. I believe that the Feminista Pláticas I'm talking about today are the kind of new theories, methodologies that she's calling for. So I said I would start with the epistemological grounding. Like Anzaldúa and so many other critical scholars of color, I understand that my epistemological grounding comes from my family. My system and ways of knowing comes from my family and my ancestors. I really learned about the strength of and wisdom of brown women through my mom, who went back to finish high school when I was in elementary school, and also from my sister, who has been a Josie. My mom is Josephine Delgado. My mom is Josephine Delgado. My sister's Josie Herrera, who is a elementary school educator and now a district educator. The two of them, and I grew up listening to the cuentos of my grandma Eloise Delgado and my grandma Micaela Bernal, along with my dad John Bernal. Their stories actually led me as a young adult to collect family oral histories. And I did this on old cassette tapes where I interviewed grandmas, aunts, uncles, great aunts and uncles actually. Note to self, these are on old cassette tapes. I've never digitized them. I keep telling myself I need to do that. So that's next on the list. But from them, from my family and from those oral histories, I began to understand the direct impact of the school-to-prison pipeline on my family. I learned the importance of sharing intergenerational knowledge. And I learned how important it is to not be looking for an universal truth when doing these oral histories. My methodological path was literally shaped by those oral histories and these family members. I learned, as Sheri Moraga says, to put faith in the language of the body where the word is made flesh by the storyteller, through my family, through my ancestors. Those oral histories led me to a family history that was impacted by the racist psychological behavioral studies of the 1930s and 1940s that found Mexican families like mine uneducable. There's a very, very long history of damage and trauma to Latinx, Indigenous, Black, and other communities of color caused by research grounded in white supremacy and colonization. That history and the ongoing norms to engage in research that is supposedly objective, supposedly neutral, and really separated from our hearts is the reason why feminista methodologies are so needed. Some of the family members in these photos I knew deeply. Others I never met, but they all informed my ways of knowing. Who they were as farm workers, as railroad workers, as seamstress, who they were as humble, as resilient, and as complicated individuals, shaped who I am today and how I engage in research. I share these photos with you to demonstrate the kind of epistemological grounding that is foundational to feminista theorizing generally, and specifically to the Pláticas that I will talk about in just a moment. So those family stories and that epistemological grounding led me to my dissertation research. And that focused on Chicana's resistance and leadership in the 1968 East Los Angeles walkouts. These were walkouts where about 15,000 young people walked out of East LA high schools to protest, to demand a quality education. And sadly, many of their demands were very similar to what we hear today in terms of eliminating tracking, eliminating racist teachers and administrators, including Mexican culture and history into the curriculum. In fact, theirs were some of the first cries for ethnic studies, which is now a requirement for high school graduation in California, and most of the rest of the country is definitely under attack. So in the mid-1990s, I collected oral histories from these 8 women who were leaders in those walkouts. The knowledge I gained about resistance and leadership and the stories I heard from them took me back to my own family stories. Relationships are important to research, and I've actually kept in contact with a lot of these women over the years. At the time that I interviewed them, though, my formal methodological training didn't actually provide all the necessary tools I needed to disavow research approaches rooted in patriarchy, rooted in colonial logics, or in white supremacy. So I'm forever indebted to Black feminists and Chicana feminists outside of the field of education. I was doing my PhD work at UCLA in education, and Black feminists and Chicana feminists outside the field. I'm also thankful to my mentor, longtime friend, Dr. Daniel Solórzano, who's still a professor at UCLA, because he allowed me to bring that feminist work in by women of color into my dissertation in education at a time that that really wasn't done at all. I have a quick story about this early research. Ramona, Dr. Barreto-Kutri, and I were we were professors. We were graduate students at the time, and I don't know if you'll remember this story, but I was just starting the research. I hadn't yet identified the women, but I shared with another graduate student, male student, older than me. He was of the movement generation. And I told him, I'm going to do this work on the East LA walkouts, looking at Chicana, female leaders. And he very casually responded to me, that's a great idea. Except there really weren't female leaders, they were all male. I heard the noise you said, that's what I said. Imagine this young graduate student, I was deflated hearing that comment. My mentor turned me to Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It's an old 1969 book about paradigm shifts in the natural sciences. And Kuhn presented a model for a fundamental change in theories and scientific paradigms. And he argued that without major paradigm shifts, we wouldn't see certain scientific phenomena. So he gave the example of a scientist who was said to have discovered the gas that was later found to be oxygen, never saw it as oxygen, like the other scientists later who had gone through a paradigm shift. So the paradigm of my classmate didn't allow him to see young Chicanas as leaders. Today, I argue that the research paradigm shifts that Chicana Latina scholars have offered actually allows us to see and understand the education and educación of Latinx communities differently than dominant research paradigms. So let me say a little something about those early paradigm shifts. Shortly after my dissertation, I began to articulate a paradigm shift when I published Using a Chicana Feminist Epistemology in Educational Research. And in that article, I drew from 2 scholars named Strauss and Corbin who offer this notion of theoretical sensitivity. And I used that and extended that to formulate what is now an often cited and used concept of cultural intuition, which is an evolving concept that is the basis of a feminista epistemology. So based on that early research of the women from the walkouts, I theorized how my experiential knowledge as a first-generation college student, work experiences as an elementary school teacher, my cultural history, those family stories, Chicana feminist literature, all guided my methodological approach in that research. That is, I basically was outlining my early, and I will absolutely admit, somewhat limited idea of a Chicana feminist epistemology. And around the same time as I published this Harvard Ed article, some of my contemporaries were also theorizing similar epistemological and methodological paradigm shifts in education. Dr. Sofia Vienes published her piece in Harvard Educational Review, and Dr. Alejandra Elenes in a journal called Educational Theory. They were the foundation for the methodological disruptions that I turn to now. So today there are literally generations of scholars who've developed a number of feminista methodological approaches that stem from a Chicana Latina feminist epistemology. More than I can fit in this flower diagram: mujerista portraiture, critical race feminista quantitative methodology, testimonial, joteria mujerista, critical race feminista. I'll talk the remaining of my time about Pláticas specifically, coming out of this paradigm shift, of this methodological disruption. And as a reminder, Pláticas, literally informal conversations. So when I was a professor at the University of Utah, I'd often meet with groups of doctoral students at my house or one of the students' house. Dr. Freri picked me up yesterday from the airport, and out of the blue, we were talking, and he remembered one of those meetings at my house when he was a doctoral student. And we'd have these conversations, and what would happen is we were actually having pláticas about pláticas when we realized there was an absence of scholarship that really went into detail about pláticas as a research method or methodology, which are different. I'm happy to talk about that in questions if people want to, but the literature didn't talk about it as a method or methodology. Most of the graduate students were working on dissertation proposals and really had a need to articulate this for the Chapter 3 in the dissertation, as well as IRB, Institutional Research Board, that they need to get their research approved by. So as a result of those kitchen table pláticas, one of my then doc students, Dr. Cindy Fierros, and I delved into the literature and learned that pláticas had actually been used in social science research since the 1970s, especially in social work and mental health studies. The use of pláticas in what was called Hispanic-focused research emerged as a result of researchers believing that traditional research models, particularly ethnographies and surveys, I don't know why, didn't work with Hispanic populations. And so the research used pláticas as an entryway or as small talk prior to getting to the real data, to the real research. So in our 2016 article, we offered specific contours to define a pláticas methodology and really helped to begin to change the conversation on the use of pláticas from small talk to a valid, culturally grounded methodological approach. Since that publication, there has been a clear increase in the number of dissertations, theses, published articles, chapters. A ProQuest search in March of 2021, there were 234 published theses and dissertations. In 2023, there were 604. And today, 3 years later, there are approximately 756, which is about a threefold increase in 3 years, and that only includes dissertations and theses. So this shows the growing interest and commitment to the development of a plática methodology, especially from early career scholars, because we're talking thesis and dissertations. So for those of you who are keeping track, remember I said there's two things that I wanted you to take away: an understanding of the journey to Feminista Pláticas as a methodological disruption. That's what I just told you. And two, an understanding of what Feminista Plática methodology looks like. That's where I'm going for the remainder of my time. Those of us who engage in this methodology often get inquiries from early career scholars, graduate students who maybe want to use this type of a methodology, or maybe from colleagues who have students who want to employ this methodology. And colleagues will often say, so what's the difference between a Plática methodology and, say, semi-structured interviews? Well, the growing body of literature points to the numerous ways that this methodology is different. But I want to name three important contours that if somebody says, well, what is a Plática methodology? At least these could kind of give a sense to someone who's not familiar. The first is that it's culturally grounded in body, mind, spirit of researchers and collaborators. What that translates to is that it's a relational methodology. Often, not always, intergenerational. And there's nuances around language use, whether that be in Spanish, whether that be in Spanglish, or Spanish without translation, which is often called creating a linguistic disruptive space. And there's also very often cultural practices that come out in this kind of a methodology. So chisme, which I will translate to sophisticated gossip. Also consejos, life's teachings, and respeto, respect. There's also the role of solidarity, vulnerability, and reciprocity. Both the researcher and collaborator are understood as knowledge producers. So I personally don't believe any methodology, any qualitative methodology really completely eliminates the power relationship in research. There's a deliberate effort to limit that, to see the collaborator as a knowledge producer. Solidarity involves reciprocity. And that means that the researcher is not neutral. So in a semi-structured interview, sometimes it's the issue of you say as little as possible. You don't want to lead the collaborator. You don't want to hear yourself on the recording either. But you're removed. That's not the case in this. In fact, I would argue that any kind of social justice research is not neutral. It is biased. You're doing that work to create some kind of change, some kind of justice, to make something better. I would actually argue all research is, no research is objective, but specifically why, and being upfront with those biases, with those assumptions that you come in with. And then the third is the idea that it's a potential tool of healing and resistance. So over and over again, we hear how both researchers and collaborators experience pláticas as part of a healing process. These pláticas, this going back and forth, this being in relation, is a healing process because they often share laughter, tears, pain, joy in this process. It's common for the researcher to emphasize with struggles and share how their experiences might actually mirror their collaborators' experiences. So these three contours or principles, I guess, of pláticas lead me to that growing body of literature that I just was telling you how quickly it's been growing. So in last year, three of my actually former students, but colleagues, they are all professors in different places now, Socorro Morales, Tania Gaxiola, and Ama Itzi Flores, we curated a space for pláticas in a special issue in a journal called the International Journal of Qualitative Studies and Education. There were over 70 submissions, and though we couldn't publish them all, we really got an insider's view to how pláticas as a methodology is being expanded, extended, further developed. So what I'd like to do is quickly mention three articles from the special issue that are examples of how collectively scholars are engaging in Feminista Pláticas methodology, thereby really further developing and extending the methodology. So the first is a piece by Dr. Mayra Puente and Dr. Veronica Velez. And they merge Feminista Pláticas with GIS software and US Census data to develop what they call Platicando y Mapeando. And their study of college and opportunities in a very rural area in California, rural Latinx youth from San Joaquin Valley. These high school seniors provide insights as to how Pláticas their Pláticas added significant layers of information, of data, to the census data. So the maps they created with GIS looked very different when the students, via Pláticas, shared their embodied knowledge, shared a political and social context through their discussions. I'm going to share with you two maps. You don't have to know the details of them, but let me explain the point, which is the top map accurately overlays the percentage of Latinx in the total population in this rural community with the low percentage of bachelor degree attainment. But the second map on bottom, informed by the Pláticas, by the youth's embodied knowledge and their families and communities, political context, including the number of Trump voters that contributed to local policies that impacted low college attainment. And so I know I'm not doing their research justice, so I encourage you to pick up the article if you're interested. Particularly what is powerful about their work is they are but two of the scholars who are merging this qualitative methodology of Pláticas with quantitative method. And so more and more folks are doing that, and you have more robust findings. The second example I want to give you is by Ángel González, Roberto Orozco, Sergio González, all of them PhDs. I didn't say doctor, but all of them PhDs. Now, they make a significant departure from much of the Pláticas work being done by drawing from Joteria scholarship. Joteria scholarship is queer Latinx body of scholarship, a field of study. And they do that to unsettle heteronormativity, cis patriarchy. And what they do is they draw upon their individual respective empirical research that is with queer or trans college students to offer what they call queer Pláticas. And they note, I think this is important, they note that the original contours that Cindy and I outlined in our 26 article, oops, I keep hitting that microphone, that we outlined in that article, where we point to the familial traditions of Pláticas, where we felt at home and embraced, they point out that those experiences are often, or those Pláticas are often experienced differently by queer family members when those conversations are laced with or embedded with heteronormativity. And so what they do is they propose a queer Pláticas methodology. And what I want to note is that their work is significant to how naming and centering one's queer identity, both as the researcher and as the collaborator, it is at the root of epistemological perspectives that they employ. And the work points to the fact that there are many, many different knowledge systems of knowing in Latinx communities. And the last example that I want to share with you is there are 3 articles in the special issue that, while they are methodological, also talk about Pláticas as a pedagogical tool used in classrooms. So, for example, Cindy Mata, who's a longtime K-12 educator, she's now the UC Irvine, University of California Irvine History Project Director. She talks about using family photographs aimed at keeping memories alive through the use of Pláticas with families and students. And what she does is she notes the erasure around Salvadorian histories in California K-12 curriculum. There's an erasure, a silence there. And she walks us through the deliberate process of developing lesson plans aimed at disrupting this curricular silence around Salvadoreño communities, but also around the silence within these communities due to the trauma and those who fled war. She demonstrates how elementary school students become researchers while centering their ways of knowing, informed by their families, history, trauma, and war, but also joy via the Pláticas and the photos together. Those are 3 examples of how Pláticas have been used. I'm hoping with questions we can kind of hear and other ideas or questions and the other ways that it's embodied. I'm going to end how I often end, which is offering respeto and appreciation to a few of the mujeres I've learned from or collaborated with over the years. There are so many more. And their collective body of scholarship pushes me, I hope pushes us, to answer Ansaldua's call and shift the normative paradigms by offering new kinds of theories and new theorizing methods. So, gracias a ustedes, gracias to all of you. We can move with some questions. Do you want me here? Do you want me there?
Okay. Okay. We are grateful to have had the opportunity to hear from Dr. Delgado. Sorry, I'm nervous right now. From Dr. Dolores Delgado Bernal. In her lecture, Vamos a Platicar, Conceptualizing Pláticas as a Feminista Research Methodology. It has been empowering to hear about Dr. Delgado Bernal's journey through her upbringing and family teachings into Chicano studies, especially specializing in Chicanas. Through this lecture, we have also been able to see what led Dr. Delgado Bernal to the study of Pláticas. As a student that studies Chicano studies, it has been empowering to be able to hear more about using the Pláticas methodology with women, as they have long been excluded from the conversation, but also using them to enlighten our own families and friends. Today, Dr. Delgado Bernal's lecture has helped us to see better into exploring and using Pláticas and how we can continue into researching those and using them for the future generations to come, not just for one community, but of every community that we know and come from, just as Dr. Delgado Bernal has done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for your response, and thank you, Dr. Delgado
I'm going to ask
Bernal.
you the same thing. Should I be sitting?
You can stand wherever. Probably right here.
Okay.
Probably right here, because we're going to transition into the Q&A session.
Okay.
So for our students in the room, if you have a question, please line up here on the microphone. Before you ask your question, please say your name, major, and your minor. Same goes for those on Zoom. If we have any people in the Zoom chat, please include your name, major, and minor, and paste your questions into the chat. Samara will be monitoring the chat, and we'll try to do a mixture depending on how many people we have on Zoom. And so I'll go ahead and kick us off. And so my question is, as you mentioned, political climate this week, and proposed policies to limit certain racial theories and teaching methods in schools, and the fact that we are students at a predominantly white institution, what can we do to better advocate for and participate in intersectional and ethnic learning that would include us learning things like Feminista and Chicana theories?
Yeah, thank you. It's the answer to that is I don't have completely, but it's a really important one because allyship and how folks, we all have different privileges, right? It's intersectional, but for folks who have different privileges is so important how you are present and speak up. Bettina Love, Black education scholar, talks about the difference between being an ally and being a co-conspirator. We always want allies, and that's good, people who will be there. But she says co-conspirators are different. It's a deeper level of engagement, a deeper level of advocacy, and using one's privileges, whatever they may be, class, race, gender, sexuality, religion, whatever it is. How do you use those privileges for others to create a more just society? And so I always say I want to be a co-conspirator with you, not just an ally. Yeah.
I love that. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll go ahead and open up questions for the room for those in here and on Zoom.
I'm going to get my water. I left it here.
I have a question from Zoom. This is from focus on developing this methodology for a distinct ethnic background or interest?
Well, to answer the second part about should we further develop, I would absolutely say yes. In terms of with multi-ethnic racial groups, there is a doctoral student at UCLA who, Pacific Islander, but I don't remember, I think he's Samoan, but has started to look at, and I don't know the term, but there's a similar term to Pláticas in Samoan culture, and how there's similarities but some differences. And so I think that's really important. I think the question, what I hear in that question is, who do we do this research with? But what I often get from folks is, who as researcher can do this research? And good allies, speaking of allies, say, just tell me if I can't do it. I'll have male students, Chicanos, I'll have white allies say, like, just tell me, like, if I'm not supposed to do this, okay. In the article that my colegas and I, the other co-editors have, we have a whole section on that, because I think the easy question would be, the easy answer would be for me to say who can and can't do it. But that's really simplistic. It's much deeper, and so what we offer are some questions of what should you be asking yourself if you're thinking about using this methodology. What is your relationship to Pláticas as a child, as a young adult? What is the relationship of, and this is partially what I think this person on Zoom is asking, what is the relationship that your collaborators have with Pláticas? What is your purpose? Why do you want to use this methodology? So asking oneself as a researcher important questions is much easier than saying, you can do it, you can't do it, you can't do it, right? That's really simplistic. It's thinking deeply about the methodology, because a big component of it is the relational component. So starting with what's your relationship with Pláticas in your own cultural background. Yeah, yeah.
Maybe. Okay, there we go. I'm Sam Charles. I'm a mechanical engineering major, global women's studies minor. I love this idea of like bringing more of an emotional and personal connection to research. Hopefully that will be adopted more broadly. And what do you think the like long-term implications of that will be in like general research in a lot of different fields? If that's like if there's more emotion and personal connection in the research.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I think there's already a move in qualitative research in particular in that direction. So Pláticas certainly isn't the only, or even Feminista methodologies that I had up in that flower, aren't the only methodologies that are talking about this. Decolonial methodologies, many feminist methodologies talk about the mind-body-spirit connection, talk about how we, and the spirit and the mind can't be removed from the body. And so I think what are the implications of that? We still have to be reflective, but I think what that can do is the problems we've had with research and how it exploits or is extractive and takes away, particularly from communities of color, working class communities, poor communities, it's very often been extractive, taking away from. I think when we can move this shift in research, I think it allows us to be more purposeful about the relationships, more purposeful about the purpose that it's co-created, co-constructed, in seeing folks as collaborators, as knowledge producers, and also not separating that there's emotions and feelings and trauma and joy that's connected to our knowledge. So to what we know mentally, it is connected to the traumas we've had, the joys we've had. And if we can let that be versus traditional research, which says separate yourself, be objective, be neutral, I think it allows for so much more to emerge. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Sorry for taking so long.
No.
I'm Valerie Hagstrom, and recently retired from Global Women's Studies and Spanish department. I'm wondering what this research methodology, Pláticas, looks like in your classroom? Like, do you use it as a pedagogical tool as well as a research tool? And how does that work in the classroom? And how could we maybe use it in the more classrooms more broadly?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do as a pedagogy. Thank you, Valerie, for the question. I have a feeling that when I describe it, it's going to ring particularly with those of you who are in women in global women's studies here, or maybe in education. The pedagogies are similar. So I usually do a Plática check-in. So the first 5 minutes is just kind of checking in with each other, right? Maybe sharing, it's different every week, but sharing something wonderful that's happened this week, personally in your family or professionally, whatever it is. I also, when we do breakout groups and discussion groups, we'll try to frame it around a plática. So there's no one answer. There's no correct answer. Right now, and I'll sometimes say, let's think about the pláticas we have in our family, right? It's to share knowledge. It's to laugh. It's to come together. It doesn't have to be with a goal of solving. And so right now, we're going to take 15 minutes to kind of have a plática about the lecture or whatever we were doing, right? And so, again, I think for a lot of feminist scholars, for folks in education who do a lot of work around pedagogy, those are kind of the things that we do in our classrooms. But incorporating that in as practice that is culturally grounded, particularly when I was teaching at Cal State LA, I'm not working with undergrads right now the last 2 years, but at Cal State LA, which is in East LA, so my students very much like, the pláticas can be in Spanish, Spanglish, English, whatever works. And so that's part of that cultural grounding piece of it. But the 3 authors in the special issue who write about pláticas as a pedagogy, I think are really powerful and give us really unique ways to think about how can this be incorporated into classroom, not just in our research methodologies, but in classroom practice that can provide something slightly different, right? And more, and very student-centered and engaging.
Hi, I'm Miriam Christensen, and I'm a political science major, global women studies minor, but my friend who's on Zoom, her name is Raquel Smart, and she identifies as a Latina woman. Her family's from Honduras and El Salvador, and your research really touched her in a really deep way. And she says that you emphasize the importance in having Pláticas Feministas and how this is a necessity for all of us. Her question is, how can we use storytelling effectively in Pláticas Feministas to emphasize unity rather than division, especially within communities where patriarchy is deeply rooted?
I think if we think about the cultural grounding, the practice of pláticas in our homes, how those conversations take place, they're different in every family. But I guess I would say, how do we think about it as a safe but brave space? So when I think of the queer scholars who said the way Cindy and I in 2016 wrote about pláticas was from cisgendered heterosexual women. And they're like, that's not always how pláticas happened in our family. And in fact, I was silenced. So in terms of how do we bridge divisions, how do we purposefully, intentionally think of when we create a plática space, whether as a pedagogical tool or as a methodological, or as a mom, I would say, at our home, how do we create that space that is, I think we know as in gender studies that safe is overused. So I will say, how do we create those brave spaces in the classroom or in our homes or in our research where people can be different, people can hold different ideas, and engage in tough discussions that move us towards seeing somebody's another point of view, seeing justice. I just saw, it's pretty bad when you lecture and you refer to social media, like that's where I'm getting my knowledge. But I just saw a really good meme right after election that had two women at the table and said, we can agree to disagree. And the other character, who you can tell is darker skinned woman, says, that's what pizza toppings, not racism, not sexism, right? But in terms of brave spaces, how do we create those spaces where we can have those tough conversations? And I don't have the answer, but I think we have to be intentional. I think we have to be intentional about that so that we can create more allies, create more co-conspirators.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a sociology major and a global women's studies minor. So my question is, next semester I'm going to be a research assistant for a professor who studies the Black LDS experience, and I'm wondering how can a white girl such as myself engage in this methodology in a way that is effective and that makes it feel like I am, even though I'm an outsider, that I am going about it in a way that is valuing the other person's thoughts and not making it feel like I'm just like, I don't exactly know how to describe it, but like when I'm not necessarily part of the community that I'm researching, how can I engage in this in an effective way?
Yeah. That is a powerful question. Number one, it shows you are being reflective about your identities and this particular project and how that fits. I think part of it is there's a lot of work in terms of kind of what should you be reading to kind of help understand those perspectives as background. Importantly, how do you listen? How do you listen with intent? Too often, as any researcher, we go in thinking we know, and listening becomes really, really important. But I think in that situation, that research project you just described, clearly you're not from that specific community. And so what is I call it homework. What's the homework you have to do to have some of that background knowledge that can move you towards being a co-conspirator, right? And the homework, the listening to those in that community become really, really important. But again, I will say the fact that you're thinking this is that reflexivity is part of the process. Understanding that those kinds of power dynamics, those kinds of intersectional identities, and you not being a member of this specific community means you got to be intentional about some things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
For sure.
I'm Ramona, Dolores' friend, and so I'm interested in Pláticas in like an electronic digital age, moving from Pláticas face to face to, so is there work being done in that area, pros and cons, possibilities?
Well, definitely, if I'm understanding the question in terms of Zoom Pláticas. So I'm currently working in an online doctoral program. So I have 3 students right now that are doing their research, 2 with Latina superintendents, one nationwide, one in California superintendents, and one with Latina principals. And all of their pláticas are on Zoom. And so all kinds of things can be done to kind of break that digital. Yeah, thank you, that wall. Everything I've had students do, one is during the plática, they ask the person to bring to the Zoom meeting, that is the plática, a cultural artifact that represents their journey to the superintendency. And there's something physical there. We're still on Zoom, but there's something physical there to share, to talk about, to get to a different kind of emotional connection, right? I've also had students who have, graduate students who have like bought a Uber Eats or something like that, so that we kind of break bread together even though we're in totally separate places. So yes, I think it's possible, and we have to think of ways to continue to make it possible because of the world we're in. Post-COVID, that's when we had the, online, and now it's like, it's here to stay. So how do we adjust and adapt in different ways? And some of the students had planned to do face-to-face, and when they reached out to busy superintendents, busy principals, they're like, I can't, but I'll do a Zoom meeting with you. And so, and I had suggested you might want to at least put or Zoom, face-to-face or Zoom. I think all three of them are completely Pláticas that are on Zoom, not in face-to-face, because the busy lives of these professionals that they're doing research with. So, yeah.
Thank you, everyone who's still around for your questions. Thank you again, Dr. Delgado Bernal, for your presentation. Let's go ahead and give one more round of applause as we close.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
I feel like I'm doing a double layer here of closing, but thanks to all of you for contributing to our Global Women's Studies community today, and in all of the ways that you do, for being the caring and committed people who work with conviction and with passion for doing that which you believe and know is right. Thank you.